In the scorching summer of 1876, the Great Plains of Montana bore witness to a pivotal moment in American history, the Battle of Little Bighorn. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a man of unyielding ambition and unwavering confidence, led his 7th Cavalry Regiment into the fray, determined to vanquish the combined forces of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes. But as the dust settled on that fateful day, Custer's hubris was met with catastrophe, and the very fabric of the American military was forever altered. Join us as we delve into the intricacies of this infamous battle and unravel the complex web of circumstances that led to one of the most shocking defeats in U.S. military history. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Lieutenant Colonel Custer resolved to launch an immediate assault, driven by an unyielding determination to prevent the enemy's escape. This bold endeavor was a testament to his unwavering commitment to dictate the course of events, rather than succumb to circumstance. Custer's approach to battle was characterized by an unshakable conviction in the efficacy of decisive charges from multiple quarters, invariably culminating in the enemy's defeat. His military strategy was straightforward, yet resolute. Gain the upper hand through a surprise attack, subsequently consolidating this advantage by entrapping the enemy in a pincer movement. Alas, this unyielding win-at-all-costs strategy, to the detriment of Custer and his men, failed to contemplate any outcome other than victory. Had Custer been in Major Reno's position, his tactics might have borne fruit. However, Reno was not disposed to reckless abandon. His leadership style eschewed precipitous dives into danger, unencumbered by considerations of personal safety. Custer, in this regard, proved a poor leader, expecting others to emulate his aggressive approach to combat, an expectation woefully at odds with reality. Custer's plan, even in the face of overwhelming odds, might have succeeded had Reno charged forthwith into the fray, unhesitatingly, against the Hunkpapa warriors. In this sense, Reno bore the brunt of censure, both from the public and the military, who concluded thus. Yet, Reno was not Custer. He lacked the requisite boldness and unwavering drive to charge forward, unencumbered by considerations of consequence other than victory. Custer placed Reno in a predicament of unmitigated stress, a situation Reno, and indeed most officers, were ill-equipped to navigate, resulting in hesitation and retreat, rather than a resolute charge. Reno opted to dismount his men, forming a skirmish line, rather than charging through the encampment, thereby relinquishing any initiative and momentum, which might have proven crucial against overwhelming odds. Even had Custer's strategy defied the dictates of common sense, once Reno terminated the attack, common sense reasserted itself, rendering the prospect of any outcome other than a Native American victory increasingly improbable. Unlike General Crook, who had retreated a week prior under the protective fire of his Crow auxiliaries, Lieutenant Colonel Custer either failed to comprehend or obstinately refused to acknowledge the reality of his situation. He found himself ensnared in a bold, multi-pronged attack, which, had it succeeded, would have been hailed as a stroke of genius. However, once the momentum was lost, his divided forces became vulnerable to being picked off one by one, a predicament from which they could not recover. It is noteworthy that Major Benteen and Major Reno managed to salvage their positions, whereas Custer did not. They adapted to the adverse situation, establishing a makeshift defensive position on a hill, which required a disciplined assault to be overrun. Throughout the annals of Western history, such defenses have often held out against Native American attacks until the attackers, exhausted, withdrew, as occurred on June 25th and 26th, thereby enabling Benteen and Reno to survive. Unjustly, Custer is frequently depicted as an egotistical monster. While he certainly possessed supreme self-confidence, his greater flaw lay in his inability to relate to other soldiers and officers. His charisma might have carried him through in the heat of battle, but his poor motivational skills in everyday Army life and poor judgment in dealing with others alienated everyone except his superiors. To understand why Custer was chosen to lead the 1876 expedition in the Northern Plains, it is essential to consider what his superiors desired. Custer was a man of action, and they sought action. Although the ostensible reason for the expedition was to encircle the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne, thereby compelling them to relocate to reservations, The true objective was to vanquish them in battle. Lieutenant Colonel Custer was the ideal candidate for Generals Sherman, Sheridan, and Terry, as they required a commander who would not hesitate to prevent the hostiles from escaping. The campaign strategy was predicated on the notion that by attacking villages and destroying homes and possessions, the Native Americans would be worn down into submission. The generals selected Custer with the expectation that he would achieve victory, but when the campaign failed, they made him the scapegoat. Furthermore, the approach erroneously assumed that the warriors would retire and fight only to prevent their families from being forced to leave. This assumption proved incorrect. Having forced General Crook to withdraw, the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne were confident in their ability to defeat a smaller force. We can only speculate regarding Custer's motivations, but it is clear that he coveted publicity. Why else would he bring a reporter along, contrary to orders? His exchange with white man runs him, a Crow scout, provides further evidence of his self-aggrandizement. These people are troublesome and bother the white people and the Crows. Today, I'm going to give them a lesson. I'm going to beat you Crows and build a fort at the confluence of the Little and Big Horns, so you can live in peace. For Custer, this would have literally and metaphorically placed him on the map. Although some individuals assert that Custer aspired to be president or pursue a career in politics, this seems improbable. As I have argued elsewhere, it is more plausible that he aimed to emulate Buffalo Bill Cody and reenact his acts of valor. Regardless of the reason, Lieutenant Colonel Custer was undoubtedly egotistical, fixated on building his legend. When his luck ultimately ran out, his widow Libby endeavored to perpetuate that legacy. Libby Custer perpetuated his legend through historical distortions, such as the myth that Custer's body was not mutilated. As noted by Tom Hatch in the Custer Companion, it is difficult to believe this given that the Indians likely were not even aware of his presence. Another misguided explanation comes from Mari Sandoz, who theorized that Custer took a Cheyenne bride during his campaign, as discussed in her book Crazy Horse. History often misleads due to its reliance on the interpretation of imperfect evidence. In Custer's case, the most accurate conclusion is that he simply ran out of luck. His limitations finally caught up with him. He was neither a maniac nor stupid. Custer's egotism often led to unreasonable behavior, alienating those around him. His simplistic approach to military success left no room for anything but victory, so when victory became impossible, he had no way to save himself or his men. Custer's superiors were well aware of his ego, but they also knew he was fearless and charismatic in combat. After the fact, claims that Custer disobeyed orders exploited the ambiguity in Terry's instructions, shifting the blame onto Custer instead of those truly responsible, those who appointed him. Generals Sherman and Sheridan desired to duplicate this method in the North after witnessing its effectiveness in the Southern Plains, with Mackenzie's attack on the Kiowa, Comanche, and Southern Cheyenne at Palo Duro Canyon. They chose a leader who would boldly attack without hesitation and who had the confidence to strike quickly enough to prevent the Native Americans from escaping. Lieutenant Colonel Custer was their chosen commander. While Custer's inherent flaws undoubtedly contributed to his downfall, the survival of Major Benteen and Major Reno suggests that additional factors were at play. One claim made subsequent to the battle was that the Native Americans possessed superior weaponry, a claim that was patently untrue. Although some of the Native Americans were equipped with repeating rifles, their collection of arms was varied and improvised. In contrast, the troopers were equipped with the latest Springfield carbines, single-shot rifles that could be easily reloaded by ejecting the shell at the breech and inserting another cartridge, a process that should have been straightforward. However, the real problem lay in the lack of practice with these rifles, particularly in adjusting the sights for different ranges. Initially, the troopers fired from a distance, but evidence suggests that once the engagement moved closer, they overshot their targets, their fire proving ineffectual as it passed over the fighters' heads. Reports from the village, such as those from Hunk Papa's Moving Robe and Pretty White Buffalo, noted bullets shattering and rattling through the teepee poles. Although these observations were from the Reno fight near the village, it is reasonable to assume that this mistake occurred throughout the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Richard A. Fox, through archaeological evidence, reconstructed a similar scenario, supporting what Moving Robe and White Buffalo had observed. Military training at the time was extremely rudimentary, contributing to the troopers' ineffectiveness in battle. The number of rounds allocated for target practice each year was so low that many troopers likely had little to no experience firing a rifle, let alone under battle conditions. In the chaos of combat, it was unlikely that individuals would remember to adjust their sights, and with weak leadership, it was improbable that clear commands to do so were given. However, the lack of military training was not a singular issue plaguing the 7th Cavalry, but rather a widespread problem endemic to the 19th century U.S. Army. Colonel Edward Settle Godfrey, a comrade of Major Benteen, posited that filthy or corroded cartridges necessitated the use of a knife for removal, as they would not eject easily. Nevertheless, the facts fail to provide substantial corroboration for this assertion. A mere 3 out of every 80 cartridge cases discovered in the Custer sector of the conflict exhibited signs of scratching. On the Reno-Benteen defense location, this number was a similarly insignificant 7 out of 257. This scant evidence is insufficient to explain Custer's defeat or lend credence to this explanation. Custer's refusal to utilize Gatling guns has been cited as a contributing factor to his defeat, but it is more accurately viewed as an indication of his offensive strategy. Custer perceived no utility in the Gatling guns, as they would prove ineffective against a Native American village, which was not a fortified military position, but rather a collection of civilian residences likely to be abandoned at the commencement of hostilities. He regarded the guns as unnecessary encumbrances that would hinder his speed, a crucial factor in surprising the enemy. During the Battle of Adobe Walls in 1864, Gatling guns had prevented Carson's forces from being annihilated. However, Custer had no intention of adopting a defensive strategy and would not have known how to utilize them effectively even if he had. General Nelson A. Miles remarked that he was not surprised Custer declined to take them, citing their usefulness. "They are worthless for Indian fighting." The troops, exhausted from their forced overnight march, were indeed fatigued, but this was a circumstance shared by all the men, not solely those under Custer's command. It appears that within the 2 detachments under Custer, one group rallied and acted heroically, whilst the other descended into complete disarray. This disparity may explain the conflicting Native American accounts, which some have utilized to question their reliability. The tired condition of the troops contributed to their defeat, but it was a relatively minor factor, one that could have been overcome with superior leadership and strategy. The fact that, after Custer's 5 troops were annihilated, the Native Americans who returned and engaged the 7 remaining troops were repelled, indicates that the force was sufficiently strong had they acted together in unity. "No commanding commander can win a battle," General Nelson Miles observed, "if 7/12 of his command are still outside the fight when his rifle shots are heard." If all forces had attacked as a unified whole, Custer might have had a chance of prevailing, despite the overwhelming odds. This unity would not only have leveraged their numerical strength, but also scattered the warriors, who would struggle to protect their families. Custer's military strategy invariably involved charging at the enemy, preferably from multiple directions, a tactic he was likely to employ, despite its later apparent recklessness. Major Reno's charge lost momentum. Custer was delayed in finding a river crossing point to synchronize with Reno's attack, and Major Benteen's force was not effectively utilized. Benteen did not actively engage the enemy, as he lacked clear orders regarding when and where to attack. He was simply instructed to move south and southwest and engage any Indians encountered. Colonel Edward S. Godfrey, who was attached to Major Benteen's command but not present during the battle, subsequently attributed blame to Major Reno's retreat from the trees, based on a conversation he had in 1886 with Chief Gall. Benteen believed that, had Reno not retreated, the Native Americans would have been compelled to withdraw when faced with the prospect of engaging both Reno and Custer simultaneously. In making this assumption, Godfrey seemed to presume that the U.S. Army could have emerged victorious if not for tactical mistakes. In my view, the worst-case scenario would have been that a greater number of troops might have survived had they been led to defend cohesively as a unified force. The best-case scenario would have been for sheer momentum to carry the day. Unfortunately, Reno's hesitation led to the demise of Custer's forces, who were not adept at defensive tactics. It is clear that Custer's primary concern at the time was preventing the Native Americans from escaping. This fear was shared by the entire U.S. Army, as their multi-pronged approach was specifically designed to prevent Indian withdrawal. It is essential to note that the Army was deliberately attacking civilian encampments, predicated on the belief that warriors prioritized the safety of their families over engaging in direct combat. This strategy had proven successful in the recent Red River War in the Southern Plains, which had culminated in victory a mere 18 months prior. While General Terry commanded Gibbon's forces alongside his own, he effectively delegated command of his own forces to Custer. Meanwhile, General Crook's force operated independently from the other two, which may have constituted a significant weakness in the campaign.